Somebody scattered a Chaos Garden seed mix this spring with genuine excitement. Wildflowers, herbs, vegetables, all tossed together the way every Chaos Gardening video told them to. No rows, no spacing, no rules. By July it was a tangle of weeds with 3 stunted zinnias fighting for light at the edge. Somebody else did the exact same thing. Same seed mix, ordered from the same company, scattered with the same enthusiasm in May. By July theirs was a dense, layered, genuinely beautiful chaos of blooms and herbs and vegetables that looked like it had been growing for years. Same seeds, same method, same chaos philosophy, wildly different results. There is one specific variable that separates those two outcomes. It's not luck, it's not a green thumb, it's not soil quality, though that gets blamed constantly. It's something almost nobody explains when they tell you to just throw seeds and let nature figure it out, because that phrase is technically true and almost completely misleading at the same time. Chaos gardening is not ruleless. It just runs on a different rule system than the one you learned. And if you don't know that second rule system exists, you will follow the marketing advice exactly as given and still fail, because the advice left out the one thing that actually determines whether chaos becomes abundance or chaos becomes a weed patch. I'm going to show you exactly what that variable is, how to recognize it's missing in a garden that's already failing, and how to build it in from the start if you haven't planted yet. Here's what chaos garden failure actually looks like. Not one symptom, a cluster of them, and if you've experienced even 2 or 3, you're looking at the same root cause. The tall plants shaded out everything else within 6 weeks. Your sunflowers or cosmos got huge fast, and by midsummer the lower growing herbs and vegetables underneath were pale, leggy, reaching for light that never reached them. The weeds took over, and you genuinely couldn't tell anymore what you planted versus what just showed up. Within 2 months, the bed looked less like a curated wild garden and more like an abandoned lot. A few aggressive plants, usually something like borage, calendula, or a vigorous squash, completely dominated the space, and everything else just disappeared underneath, or never got established at all. The bed looked sparse and patchy in some areas and overwhelmingly dense in others. Never the even layered fullness the Chaos Garden photos online seemed to promise. And the soil, by the end of the season, looked worse than when you started. Compacted in places, eroded in others, nothing like the rich, dark, undisturbed look of the Chaos Gardens you'd seen online. If any of that sounds familiar, you didn't do Chaos Gardening wrong in the sense of making a mistake. You did exactly what the popular advice told you to do. The popular advice is just incomplete. And the missing piece is the same piece in every single one of those failure symptoms. Here's the problem with how chaos gardening gets taught. Throw the seeds, let nature figure it out, is a real and legitimate gardening philosophy with real ecological grounding. The problem is that phrase, on its own, describes the outcome, a layered, self-sustaining, low-intervention garden, without describing the one input that actually produces that outcome. Seed companies sell chaos garden blends with almost no guidance beyond scatter and water. That's not malicious. It's just incomplete information sold alongside a product, the same way a box of cake mix doesn't explain oven calibration. But the gap matters more here, because the entire premise of chaos gardening, that you can skip the planning that traditional row gardening requires, only works if something else is doing the planning instead. In traditional gardening, you are the system. You decide spacing, you decide what grows where, you decide what gets thinned and what gets removed. That's the rule system. Rows, spacing charts, companion planting guides. In chaos gardening, you are deliberately removing yourself as the planner. But removing the planner does not remove the need for planning. It just shifts who or what is doing it. The hidden reason chaos gardens fail is this. When you remove human planning from a garden, something has to take its place. Or you don't get a managed wild ecosystem, you get an unmanaged competition for resources. And what takes the planner's place, in every successful chaos garden, is a specific set of ecological constraints that the gardener builds in deliberately before scattering a single seed. Most people skip that step entirely, because nobody told them it was a step. Here is the hidden reason. The one variable. Successful chaos gardens are not random. They are stratified. Every successful chaos garden, whether the gardener understood this consciously or not, has built in 3 layers of ecological constraint that take the place of human row planning: structural layering by height and growth habit, competitive balancing by growth rate, and density discipline at the seed scattering stage itself. Failed chaos gardens are missing one or more of those 3 layers. That's the entire difference between the 2 gardens in the opening of this video. Same seeds, same chaos philosophy. One had the hidden structure, one didn't. Layer 1, structural stratification. A genuinely successful chaos garden has plants occupying different vertical zones from the start: a tall layer, a mid layer, and a ground layer, all planted in roughly the proportions you'd find in a natural meadow or woodland edge, which is the ecosystem chaos gardening is actually modeling. Without that intentional stratification, your tallest, fastest plants simply win. There's no structure forcing height diversity, so you get monoculture by competition instead of layered diversity by design. Layer 2, growth rate balancing. Every plant in a seed mix grows at a different speed. Some germinate in 5 days and reach full size in 6 weeks. Others take 3 weeks to germinate and 4 months to mature. If you scatter them with no awareness of that timing difference, the fast growers establish dominance before the slow growers even break ground. By the time your slower plants are trying to get established, the fast growers already have the light, the root space, and the water. Layer 3, density discipline. This is the one almost nobody talks about, and it's the most counterintuitive, because chaos gardening markets itself on abundance and density, but genuine ecological density, the kind that produces a layered, healthy plant community, requires significantly less seed per square foot than most people scatter. Overscattering doesn't create more chaos garden, it creates more competition, which collapses into the same monoculture by domination outcome as layers 1 and 2, just faster. Here's the unifying principle behind all 3. A natural meadow or wild plant community isn't actually random. It's the visible result of thousands of small competitive negotiations between plants over light, water, root space, and timing. Negotiations that have been happening in that specific patch of ground for years or decades, gradually sorting species into stable, layered relationships. A chaos garden you plant this spring has none of that negotiation history. You are trying to create the visual result of an established ecosystem in a single season, starting from bare ground. Just scatter and let nature figure it out. Assumes nature has time to do that sorting work. In a single season, it usually doesn't. You have to do some of that sorting work yourself, at the planning stage, before you scatter, or the bed has to fight it out the hard way, which is what produces the failure symptoms from the pain mirror. That's the hidden reason. Now let's build the actual system. If you're still here, you're not looking for another Chaos Garden inspiration video. You've either had one fail, or you're paying close enough attention to want to get it right the first time. That's exactly the difference this video is for. What comes next is the diagnostic checklist and the planning system, the thing that was missing from every piece of just scatter it advice you've seen. Diagnostic 1, the height stratification check. Go back to the pain mirror symptom. Tall plants shading out everything within 6 weeks. Here's the diagnostic and the fix. Before you scatter anything, sort your seed mix, or your seed packets if you're building your own blend, into 3 height categories. Tall, anything that matures over 3 feet, like sunflowers, cosmos, tall cleome, amaranth. Mid, 1 to 3 feet, things like zinnias, calendula, most herbs, bush beans. Ground layer, under 12 inches, things like alyssum, creeping thyme, low-growing lettuces, nasturtium, the ratio that produces a stable layered result in a typical chaos bed, roughly 20% tall, 40% mid, 40% ground layer by seed count, not by weight. Seed size varies too much for weight to be a useful measure. The fix in practice: scatter your tall layer seeds first, in loose clusters rather than evenly across the whole bed, 3 to 5 tall plants together in a few spots, rather than spread thin across the entire area. Then scatter mid-layer seeds across the remaining open space. Then ground layer seeds last, including directly underneath and around where you clustered the tall layer, since that's exactly where you want shade-tolerant ground cover anyway. Proof checkpoint. At 6 weeks, you should be able to see distinct height zones forming, clusters of tall growth with mid and ground layer filling the spaces around and under them, not one uniform wall of the fastest, tallest plant. What nobody tells you, clustering the tall layer instead of spreading it evenly is the single highest leverage change you can make to a chaos garden plan. Even spreading tall seeds is the single most common reason chaos gardens turn into a uniform thicket of one dominant species instead of a layered planting. Diagnostic 2. The growth rate timeline check back. To the pain mirror symptom, a few aggressive plants dominated everything else, which disappeared or never established. Here's the diagnostic. Check the days to germination and days to maturity on every seed packet in your mix before you plant. Sort them into fast, germinating in under a week, maturing in under 60 days, and slow, germinating over 2 weeks, maturing over 90 days. If your mix is more than 40% fast-growing species, you have an aggressive domination risk regardless of how well you stratify by height, because fast growers will claim root space and light before slow growers even germinate. The fix: stagger your planting instead of scattering everything on the same day. Plant your slow-growing, slow-germinating species first. Give them a 7 to 10 day head start in bare, undisturbed soil before introducing the fast growers. This single adjustment compensates for the timing imbalance that most seed mixes don't account for, because seed companies blend for color and bloom time variety, not germination speed balance. Proof checkpoint. At the 3-week mark, your slow germinating species should already have true leaves and visible root establishment before your fast growers start their major growth spurt. If your fast growers are already dominating the visual space by week 3, the slow growers underneath are losing the competition for light at exactly the developmental stage when they're most vulnerable to it. What nobody tells you, a few specific plants are disproportionately responsible for chaos garden domination failures: borage, calendula, and certain squash varieties most commonly. Not because they're bad plants, because they're fast, vigorous, and almost always included in commercial chaos mixes at a higher seed ratio than their aggressive growth habit can support without crowding everything around them. If your mix is heavy in any of these 3, plant them last, in their own small clusters, not blended in with the rest. Diagnostic 3. The density check. Back to the pain mirror symptom: patchy and sparse in some spots, overwhelming in others, never the layered fullness from the photos. This is the counterintuitive one. Most chaos garden failures from overscattering don't look like failure right away. They look like enthusiasm. More seed feels like more chaos garden. It's the opposite. Here's the actual math. A genuinely successful layered chaos planting uses roughly 1 to 2 grams of mixed seed per square foot for a typical wildflower vegetable herb blend. Significantly less than the generously scatter instruction implies, and significantly less than most people actually use. Overscattering produces a brief period of dense, uniform germination that looks exactly like the photos, for about 2 to 3 weeks. Then the seedlings begin competing immediately for root space, light, and water before any of them are established enough to win that competition cleanly. The result is exactly the failure symptom: dense in the germination stage, then a dieback that leaves patchy gaps as the weaker seedlings lose the competition, and the stronger ones haven't yet filled the space they won. The fix: measure your bed. Calculate roughly 1.5 grams per square foot as your target. Mix your seed with dry sand at a ratio of about 1 part seed to 4 parts sand. This does 2 things. It helps you see where you've already scattered, since the sand is visible against soil, preventing accidental overlap, and it naturally thins your seed distribution to the correct density without you having to count individual seeds. Proof checkpoint. At 2 weeks post-germination, you should be able to see distinct individual seedlings with visible soil or mulch between most of them, not a solid green carpet. A solid green carpet at 2 weeks is the clearest early indicator that you're heading toward a density collapse failure at weeks 6 to 8. What nobody tells you, the thin, sparse-looking chaos garden bed at week 2 is the one on track to look exactly like the inspiration photos by week 10. The dense, lush-looking bed at week 2 is usually the one heading for collapse. This is the single most counterintuitive thing about chaos gardening, and the reason so many people overcorrect by scattering even more seed the following year after a failure. making the same mistake worse. Diagnostic 4. The soil disturbance check. Back to the pain mirror symptom. Soil looking worse at the end of the season than at the start. This one isn't about the seed mix at all. It's about what happens to the bed after planting. Chaos gardens are frequently planted into freshly tilled or heavily disturbed soil, because that's standard garden bed prep, carried over from traditional gardening habits. But the layered, self-sustaining ecology that chaos gardening is trying to replicate depends on relatively undisturbed soil structure and an intact soil microbial network, which tilling destroys. A chaos garden planted into recently tilled soil is fighting an uphill battle the entire season. Disrupted mycorrhizal networks, compacted subsoil from tilling equipment, and a soil structure that erodes more easily under rain because the aggregate structure that normally holds it together has been broken up. The fix: if you're planting a new chaos bed, disturb the soil as little as possible. Light surface scratching to expose bare soil for seed contact, not full tilling. If your existing bed was tilled this year and is showing soil degradation symptoms, top dress with a thin layer of compost rather than tilling again, and let the chaos planting's own root systems begin rebuilding soil structure over the season rather than disturbing it further. Proof checkpoint. Soil that's recovering correctly will show visibly improved structure, crumblier, darker, holding together in a loose clump rather than crumbling to dust or compacting to a hard layer, by the following spring, even without additional tilling. You now understand something that most chaos garden content never explains, because most of it is showing you the result, the layered, beautiful, abundant photo, without showing you the planning that produced it. Height stratification, growth rate timing, density discipline, soil disturbance management. 4 checks. 1 underlying principle. Chaos gardening replaces human row planning with ecological constraint, and if you don't build that constraint in, you don't get controlled chaos. You get an uncontrolled competition that usually has one winner and a lot of losers. A single small bed, your first attempt. Run all 4 diagnostics before you plant. Sort your seeds by height and growth speed, calculate your density target, and prepare the soil with minimal disturbance. This is the highest leverage moment to apply the system, before a single seed is in the ground. An existing chaos bed that's already struggling. Don't till and restart. Identify which of the 4 failure symptoms you're seeing, apply the matching fix for next season's overseeding, and address density and stratification through selective thinning this season rather than a full restart. Most struggling chaos beds can be corrected over 1 to 2 seasons without starting over. A full chaos garden across multiple beds or a larger area. Treat each bed as its own height and density system, rather than scattering your full seed mix evenly across the whole space. Vary your tall layer cluster placement bed to bed so the overall planting reads as naturally varied rather than uniformly patterned, which is the visual difference between a designed chaos garden and an accidental monoculture repeated several times. Here's what to do with this depending on where you are right now. If you haven't planted yet this season, run the 4 diagnostics before you scatter a single seed, sort by height, sort by growth speed, calculate your density, and disturb your soil as little as possible. If you already planted and you're seeing the failure symptoms, don't pull it all out. Identify which of the 4 layers is missing, apply the targeted fix, and give it through the rest of this season before deciding whether to overseed for fall or restart next spring. Drop your situation in the comments, which failure symptom you're seeing, what was in your seed mix if you remember, and whether it was a commercial blend or one you put together yourself. I want to see if the pattern holds. That commercial blends without growth rate balance are the most common source of the domination failure specifically. This is the entire reason chaos gardens get blamed on bad luck, bad soil, or a black thumb when the actual cause is almost always one of these 4 missing layers. The chaos was never the absence of a system. It was always a different system, and now you know what it is. Subscribe for the full Chaos Garden build series, how to design your own seed mix from scratch with the correct height and timing ratios built in, which commercial blends actually get the balance right, and how to convert a failed chaos bed into a successful one without starting from bare soil. The hidden reason was never hidden because it was complicated. It was hidden because nobody wrote it down. Now it's written down. Go check your bed.